Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. This is a nice turnout. I want to first just nod my deep gratitude towards Capture Photography Festival for involving myself and Nadia, to Kim for her incredible effort in building this thing from the ground up for the last 5 years, and to their small but mighty team, Jacqueline and Kate. It's a great opportunity to engage in the community here and have a conversation about work that I have had the pleasure of writing about for the last few months and thinking about. And Nadia is a great friend, so hopefully this will feel as fun for you as it does for me.
And me.
One of the first questions I wanted to put towards you is a question I tend to ask of artists every time there's sort of a new commission or a project that sort of pulls a practice in a certain particular direction, whether due to its focus on a particular medium, as is the case here, or site, which is also the case here. So I wanted to ask you about if you regard this as a departure or a continuation of the practice that you're currently spinning out into some pretty important sites, among them Oakville Galleries, your first museum solo exhibition, which just opened last weekend. And I wanted to see if this was, in your mind's eye, a continuation or, as I say, a sort of break from something you've been doing lately.
The work for this particular site is, I always work site specifically, so that is something that I've always considered. And I work in photography, so the two going together, it wasn't a huge departure. However, I guess it was a slight, the shift in scale and where it would be in public versus privately in a gallery was a definite new thing for me. And what was it? It wasn't necessarily a departure in terms of how I was working, because I'd been making images kind of like this. There are differences in this particular work, but it was in line with some of the ways I was making images. So just to give you a sense of how I made the image, I'll just briefly explain it. It was made by photographing underneath a frosted glass table-like structure, which I have since shown as sculptures. But there's a different scale actually in the way that I've composed this image as well. So it does feel different to me than the ones that I've made for, say, the show Bed Island, which I constructed and made these images for, but it's definitely not a complete departure. Mm-hmm. There are, the main difference being the sky, mm-hmm. that is featured. That's sort of in the background or the foreground. I want there to be a confusion as to where it sits, but that was something I wanted to include first. Like, I think right off the bat when I saw the site, I wanted that to be a part of this work, and it took me a while to get to how it looks, but I tried actually using real sky. This is an image of sky that's like all made in my studio, so this isn't a studio-made image, but I'm pretty happy with actually how it, I just saw it yesterday for the first time, right, in life, right? So I'm pretty happy with the way it looks, but yeah, it definitely feels different than works that I had been making for the Oakville Galleries, which is what I had been spending the last year on, which is, an old house that's like on a lake, and it's a total domestic space. It has, has references to like buildings and architecture, but it's a completely different kind of architecture. So, if that answers your question, sure. I think, there's similarities and differences. So it feels new and like something I've been working on for a while. Yeah.
And as I understand it, I haven't had a chance to see the Oakville shows yet because I've been traveling, but I'm quite eager to see how this links in. Mm. Can you talk a bit about, I gather there's a sort of a sister piece to In the Belly of a Cat. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about how these things braid together?
Yeah, so you haven't seen the show, and I'll just switch to this image. Mm-hmm. So this is an image I produced for the Oakville Gallery show, which was also done in my studio, but done in a very different way. So I had started to think about photographing from underneath, but also then taking that piece of glass and putting it kind of upright again and photographing through glass in the sort of more, I guess, traditional way you would think about glass as being something that's facing you. So this piece has, you know, this kind of like in the last one, it has these sort of sporadic objects, these domestic kinds of references, like the bottle for sure. The circles, I want them to be a bit more vague in terms of what they represent or what they are. In other works, they are often like the undersides of glasses or bottles. These have a sort of more flatness to them because they are just circular glass objects and not bottles, although the one in the bottom corner is a bottle. So you can kind of see there's like a slight difference in there. So this has obviously similar qualities to it, but there's like a total other interior kind of space. I wanted both to have this kind of interior kind of space that is existing even though referencing the outside world. So that's a little bit how they link. And they both actually have references or at least or traces of myself. I've made previous works where photographs, or I made previous works with the scanner bed specifically, which I will show. Like, I have actually quite a few images that I should probably just bang out. But those works were made with scanner beds, and there were many references to fingertips and fingerprints. So there's been references to the body, but not so overtly as these two, which I think we'll bring up, like we'll talk about more. But I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of how this image reflects the site of this space, and how I feel like the other one, the one that we have for capture, reflects the site of that one. If that makes sense.
And is it? Can you just explicate a tiny bit on the title, In the Belly of a Cat?
So In the Belly of the Cat, I mean, it was something that me and my husband were talking about. He was talking about the idea that like if you could be in a room where it was purring, like how that would feel so nice. This kind of like vibrational quality I wanted to have in the title. So titles can sometimes for me be very just like explanatory, other times a little bit more poetic. I wanted this one to be poetic because I wanted to suggest that this is a sort of space that maybe doesn't exist, or it's a space that could exist but has a reference to the body, but the body, like the cat is a body, but it could be your own, and also to consciousness. So when I think about the sort of just like the sporadic kind of placement of objects and the way that they relate, I feel like it could be kind of like little gems in your brain, or or feelings or moods that exist. And that I think occurs in this as well, this image. And this is another image of it situated in its room.
And this is probably a good moment to think about scale. What are the challenges and implications of having to work on the scale that this commission for capture requires?
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't know how big it was until I saw it. I was just telling Kim this because, you know, you see pictures, and I hadn't been able to see the site in person until literally just until after I made the piece, but it is so big, and I've worked slightly large before, but in actuality, oh, this is different, but I'm gonna put it up. In actuality, I really actually work very specifically one-to-one. So I often make images really thinking about presenting them at the scale that those things that are represented are. So in the case of like even the scanner bed images, they're printed sort of the size of the scanner bed. So there's this like real sense of objectness, like it doesn't, you know, it's like when you see a picture of a building and it's very small, there's something so different about that than if it was the size of a building. It would have more of a sense of, I think, a presence versus just like a window or like a pointing towards something like in the far distance. So this is different in the sense that it's sort of this intimate moment made very large, but I think because of the sort of abstract quality, the relationship to the clouds, you can kind of get yourself there. Like it can kind of feel like these things maybe are the size that they are. That with the exception of the hand, which, you know, I'm still thinking about actually.
Right, yeah. I want to touch on that in a moment, but maybe first, just because we're talking about, for instance, the scale of this, there's also a requirement in a project like this that there's a certain accessibility and legibility in terms of the image being in the public forum. So people aren't walking into a gallery with the intention of sort of adapting to that space psychologically. They're in the street. What are some of the, again, challenges of trying to break an image out of its sort of white cube association into a more public forum for you?
Yeah, so the other thing, that's a very good question, because it's also just one image, right? Like, this is just a single thing kind of floating in space, and it doesn't have anything else to talk to except for the surroundings that exist already. And for me, that's a little bit of a challenge. That's a challenge in and of itself. So regardless of scale, the fact that it's actually just one image is like kind of terrifying to me, because oftentimes I like to create shows and have images, first of all, multiple images, not just one, and then also talking with objects or sculptural elements. So before I lose track of the question, but I'm the challenge of that plus the public accessibility. Yeah, so that, I think actually that challenge of having it be one image is the same, and it relates to the fact that it's for the public too, because you're just getting one shot to give them
literally
something. So I made it bright and I made it colorful. No, like, genuinely, like, I wanted it to have this kind of graphic quality that was like, I wanted it to look like it had always been there in some ways, but so it had familiar colors, and actually I think I really pulled actually from the colors that exist just behind the frosted glass that exists in the building, and the kind of shadowy effects that you have that happen in the building, like surrounding the actual image. So I wanted there to be a relationship to what existed there previously, and so that it wasn't such a, like, that it was an image that you could, that had relationships to, like, even advertising or something, like something that could exist as a billboard, but then there was something like completely off about it. Like, that this is actually not something that would be up in a large scale like this, or what is this thing selling me if that's what we're, you know? So I think, and then just like the actual, like, subtle things that, you know, photography people think about, like the fact that everything is in a soft focus is actually something you don't ever really see. There's something like, something a little off about it, and I wanted that to happen. So that people could look at it and then look away and then look again. So I often try and do things that require second or third looks.
I think I have been following your practice since its early days with Daniel Faria Gallery, for instance, but I remember a real landing point for me was at the Musée d'Art Contemporain, when you were part of the most recent, and as it turns out, final biennial.
We just ended that.
It was like a mic drop. And standing beneath these towering structures, what, among other things, really landed for me was just how sculptural your practice was, and also what it does to the body. There's this kind of sense of wonder that it almost requires when you're craning your neck up and looking through a looking glass, in a sense. But also, as I mentioned in my essay, it has the feeling of positioning you on your back, as a child perhaps might be underneath the dinner party table. You know, so there's a joyous curiosity that's almost demanded of us and inspired in us in the looking. So I have a couple questions that stem from that observation. First of all, as I say, that's a very sculptural practice that I've come to know, an installation-based practice. And here you are being sort of required, because of the nature of this festival, to sort of zero in on photography. Can you talk a bit about, and of course in a city that's so deeply and historically engaged in photography, can you talk to me a bit about what the implications of that are for you, and some of the revelations maybe in the process of working in specifically a photo medium?
So look what I put up. So this is, no, look. This is, these are kinds of these were trials. These were I decided to include them as kind of interesting way to show you what I was trying to do, and how this is like, I don't know, this is like this feels like photography,
Yeah.
It feels like photography because you really see what's going on, and I think that, and you can see even me like lying down looking up. So this is something I've never actually shown anyone. But this is like a kind of almost like a test, like instead of a frosted piece of glass, this is a clear piece of glass, and I brought it outside. And so this is sort of how I ended up getting to this, like, it's obviously an incredible difference, but I wanted there to be this reference to the photograph, but almost more like a painting. Like, I wanted it to be more of this kind of imaginary world than something so real as this. And I think that, I don't know if it necessarily like talks, the looking up thing, I think still happens here, but the fact that it's on a building, it could also be this like kind of reflection. So I don't know if the kind of looking up feeling is as there in this particular work, but yeah.
It's a teaser.
What? Who put that there, Sky?
Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting because, yes, I am always thinking sculpturally in terms of different kind, in the way that I make exhibitions, but this becomes sculptural in that even that it's divided actually by the grid that you can see. And it becomes sculptural in its relationship to the way the building is. So if I think the way it sits on the building, I think actually makes it a little bit sculptural. But no, I do find it limiting actually. I find it limiting when it is just this large image that you may not have context for, because I love context so much. I love having things that are mysterious and like feel like clues for sure, but I don't want you to necessarily just be left at that. So the idea is that this is a teaser image or something. It's like an image that gives you quite a bit of information, but it still has some mystery so that you feel like you can like look into it further.
Right. I mean, one of the things I find so charming and compelling about your practice is that there's a kind of haptic quality, like there's sort of leftover detritus from an event. That's the implication sometimes I read into it. Like something happened here.
Yeah.
And yet photography as a medium, I think more along the lines of baking. Like it requires like very precise actions in order to have a very intended result. I mean, I know happy accidents happen in the darkroom all the time, but nevertheless, I guess I wonder if you can explore that a bit too, the sort of more confining quality of, or let's say the control aspect of producing an image like this, how that might relate to your other experience.
So the tricky thing that I always try and do, and for some reason it's like I've given myself this like really impossible challenge, is to like think about movement, like to think specifically about movement using still photography. So it's always about like something happening or something that is about to happen or something is happening. I mean, I think that is there in this image actually specifically, and I think I needed to put the hand there for that reason.
Right.
And the actual position of the hand, the way that the two fingers
There's, that gesture.
are sort of in motion. Like there were several others that were not going to work because that movement wasn't there. So I think about this kind of, I've lost it.
Control.
Oh yeah, and in terms of photography?
Yeah.
No, I think photography is like a sort of nice paradox, like to kind of, to think about this kind of movement, like in a very, very, very still image.
So that would probably be a nice moment to talk about the artist's hand.
Yeah.
This is the first time that you've included the artist's hand, and of course there's a long and rich history of that presence in art history.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can, why now, and why was it important for this particular image?
I think it was important for this particular image because I always want there to be some kind of reference to the body, which I think happens sort of automatically in the physical sense. Like when you're looking at the work in person, like like sculpturally, like, okay, I'm just gonna go actually through some images to give you a sense too of what I was thinking about, like thinking about surfaces and planes. So like these are images from the Oakville galleries. So they're not super bright, but there's these are the structures that I've built where I photographed from underneath, but this would be like physically walking under and around it. This is a sort of a wide shot, and it goes across 2 rooms. So because you don't have that physical sense of the body, and because I'm still interested in talking about it, I felt like it was important at that moment to make a reference to the body, because otherwise it would have been far too abstract, actually. And I wanted there to be this connection to scale that felt, I wanted there to be a connection so that you understood how big things were based on its, like,
Right,
the way that it
ratio.
relates to the hand.
Right.
And what that would feel like. So this would be like exists currently at the Oakville Galleries, like moments like this. And the flood images were sort of references to how I was thinking about nature sort of infiltrating some of my images. In the case of Capture the Sky, and in Oakville, the case of water.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Oakville Galleries, particularly the Gerlach, am I pronouncing that? Gerlach?
Gerlach, yeah.
Gallery is positioned right on the lake and recently experienced flooding.
Just last year, yeah.
Right. So you're maybe we should actually just get into that for a second. The Weather Channel, which is the name of the show at Oakville, I had, just upon talking to you this afternoon, understood maybe that you were reflecting on climate change or the Anthropocene or something along those lines, and you sort of corrected that in a refreshing way and said, no, it's about consciousness.
No, it's just about consciousness.
That's all.
It's not about anything complicated like climate change, it's about consciousness. So yeah, no, I think of the image for Capture that definitely, and I think that it's like a nice sort of flooded image that makes me feel like those thoughts in one image, so I'm happy with it there. In the case of at Oakville Galleries, I felt like there had to be many different kinds of iterations that sort of gave that feeling. So yeah, about how the Weather Channel is mostly about how like the weather is kind of like a mood or like a feeling. So in The Belly of the Cat, the Weather Channel, those things like, I'm trying to kind of point to these kinds of unnameable, unpointable, unseeable kinds of experiences that you have as a human being.
Right. And that things float to the surface.
Yeah, they like float at different levels, or there's like really low pressure, like low air pressure, and how that can be a really beautiful metaphor for how you can feel, how a body feels in relation to the world.
This is one of those moments that it's always kind of a happy collision of perspective, right? Because as a critic, as an art writer, reading this work, I was immediately picking up from it that you were perhaps engaging in a conversation on self-reflexivity or on the photographic medium itself, and which is part of how we titled this talk today, Between the Shutters, because as you see in the capture image, if you can float back to it for a sec, you've got the artist's hand, as we say. You've also positioned the viewer either on their back or at least certainly aware of a scrim that they're looking through. Yeah,
like a window would be fine,
Right. And then you've also got a question of, well, where's the subject? Right? Are we supposed to be looking through and past these objects, or in fact, is the subject then that veil that we're becoming more and more aware of because we've got things pressed up against it? And so for me, as an art historian and a reader of images, I'm thinking, so we're talking about image construction itself, and we're talking about the subject in relationship to the artist, and how that inversion can actually be playful and its own commentary on image making. But then today over lunch, you're saying, no, wait, this is, not correcting me on that, but sort of taking the conversation in a completely different direction around consciousness, and that might be, in fact, the subject at the center of this work.
No, you were right before too.
Thank God.
No, it was definitely no. No, they're about both, and I think that they're related, and I think that's why I like working with photography, because I think photography has relationships to that kind of that varies, like about the subject, for example. It always seems very. It always seems very like simple, like, well, the subject is what's in the image, right? It's always representing, the subject is there. But if you're saying the subject is the scrim, or the subject is consciousness, or how those are related, then yeah, then I think the conversation is more open, and then you can have more, like for me to say this is a photograph with my hand and objects, and it's called The Belly of the Cat, but it's not about cats, hands, or objects, is something that artists try to do, and I think that's what I'm trying to do. Like, what are the limits of photography? Where can it take you? And yeah, how are images and their construction a sort of metaphor for how we create meaning?
Right. There's a quote that I want to gesture to that felt relevant to my writing around this work, from James Elkin's The Object Stares Back. And it is, all seeing is heated, and so looking has force. It tears, it is sharp, it is an acid. In the end, it corrodes the object and observer until they are lost in the field of vision. I once was solid, and now I am dissolved. That is the voice of seeing. So I guess I wonder if we can return a bit to positioning your viewer pretty frequently in your practice, whether sculpturally or otherwise, on their backs. And if I hope reading that right.
Yeah.
How did that come to be such an important through line in your work, and what are the implications of it?
Oh God, Sky. I can answer in images, which are further down. We have to skip through so much other weird stuff. But these are just quickly more, actually, this would help answer your question.
Yeah, this is at the MAC in Montreal.
This was what Sky was referring to, and she was saying she sort of understood because these are images. I mean, these are photographs of sculptures, right? That's what we're looking at right now. But the actual sculptures themselves are very much, to me, sculptural and image at the same time. So it is literally about perspective and how it shifts from an object to a two-dimensional experience as you go under it. So horizon lines drop, and again, it's still all, it all has relationships to what we've been talking about in terms of the capture image. But and then once you go under, you're looking up, and the on the back thing is pleasure for me. That's how I make it, and it is, I mean, this was called Bed Island, Don't Sleep, so I was specifically referring to the bed because I wanted you to think about being horizontal. You don't have to actually physically be being horizontal, but I wanted there to be that kind of sensational quality to how, when you move your body, different kinds of experiences happen. How they can like conjure certain memories, for example. And just also how it is sort of a modern condition. I think like we can see a lot of images from our bed, which we never were able to do before. So
That's true.
Yeah, you look at everything from your bed.
Yeah.
And you can be like transported all over the place. And
Right, and we just take our computers to bed too, right?
Yeah,
so it's a whole other, it's relevant.
Yeah, you can do everything from your bed. Bed islands, like you're fine there. But yeah, it's hard. We need like more time, like to fully get into like the sort of relationships between this work, for example, and the Oakville Gallery's work. Like this being an island, like you assume that this is the island, right, and everything around it is water. In the other case, it's like everything around it is land, and actually the lake itself is water. So I'm constantly trying to invert those relationships and how the body moves and how it's perceived, like how it perceives what you're seeing. Let me keep going. This I'm not going to talk about, sorry. This was to just show you a relationship to scale and how, I typically work in photography, and this is a very old image. Like, this is one of the first things I ever made, actually, scaled 1:1, but it's like the size of a chandelier and then framed with glass and metal to reference the making of that image. These are some other images that I made through the frosted piece of glass. So very similar, actually, maybe the closest thing to how the capture image looks. And these were the kind of images we were looking at when I was first thinking about this project. But then changed its scale and its information content based on the new site. This is another reference to scale. This is a reference to scale. These are photo objects, like the ultimate photo object is.
And this is your work?
This is not my work.
Okay.
That's radically different. It's different, right? But I did make this, actually. So these are photographs of photographs. These are photographs of cardboard cutouts. So there's no cardboard. These are just photographs. Yeah, some more images looking at.
And then, of course,
I've lost the plot again, of course.
Oh, no, I'll bring us back, because I was also just remembering, there was a carpet work.
Wait, I'm going to keep going. Carpet work, yeah, carpet work's coming.
In Bed Island, where it was footprints, sort of the trace of bodies, but then you're looking down.
Yeah, so that's a whole, that's the beauty of like an immersive kind of art gallery experience,
Right.
Is that there is this like opportunity for sort of a body to move and really feel like you're experiencing the space from your body.
Yeah.
So these were made with a carpet and liquid light that I applied to my shoes and then walked on the carpet. And these were the traces. So it was almost like the carpet was a giant photograph or a photogram.
Right.
And then these were on the wall. So this is what I was referring to when I said I made images out of a scanner. It's always tricky to see in these conditions, but they're quite dark. And it's all referencing like a kind of subject. Still, there's like this kind of, there's this information I'm giving you, but not quite. And have you seen this man being a question was there on purpose, to sort of ask about what the subject is. And of course it is photography and it is image making and it is how surfaces are something, actually. In this case, like a lot of the photography I deal with is actually about short depth. So it is about the medium and how we normally see it and how changing it just even slightly can be a huge impact. But yeah, the hand, this was sort of references to like sort of how the hand has been there kind of the whole time, but just sort of hiding behind a curtain or something.
Right.
Yeah.
When I was beginning to think about this essay, I returned to the eclipse from last August, which was, a big deal, and people traveled around the continent to try to, be present in the right way for it. My mom, in her backyard in London, Ontario, being the teacher that she is, took a cereal box and did that whole thing, and it didn't work. There was, technology was off or something, so she kept sort of searing her eyes and having to look away, and then finally realized upon looking away that in fact the eclipse was everywhere around her. It was in these little crescent moons, and the pictures of that were flooding my social media for a day or two after the eclipse, and I remember that was the greatest pleasure for a lot of us from that event, was like not the event itself, well, yes, but the resulting sort of refracted image that was produced on the ground around us. So that was sort of a poetic entry point for me into your work, actually, was that it's not the thing itself, it's this secondary sort of trace.
And what I always think about too, and especially specifically about the hand, is that I think that's a really beautiful example, like using the eclipse, because to see something filtered through this other representational form, this index that's sort of refracted around you is,
Right.
How I think about images, of course, but I think specifically about images that can be like a hand pointing to something else, and you're almost like a dog or a cat, where you're looking at the finger, not where it's pointing to.
Right.
Or you're a human being and you're looking, bouncing back between both. So you're looking what's in front of you and what's it pointing to. I mean, you're always thinking about what something is pointing to when you're looking at a photograph, right? But I love that sort of indirect experience of seeing something that's so, common, like not the eclipse being common, but the sun or something, like seeing it in this way that yeah, refracts it into a bunch of different parts so that it's maybe more, I think, more easier to grasp. When you see
Yeah.
something in its like massiveness, it's almost impossible to fully
Yeah.
take in, like existence.
It's not complicated, it's just existence.
Just existence. Yeah.
Who do you find yourself to be in conversation with in terms of your work, art historically, but also contemporaneously, in terms of literature or poetry?
Yeah, so I love my peers, like my contemporary peers. Like I have so many great, especially female friends and artists that I've collaborated with. For example, Lori Kang, Lily Houston-Herdrick, who her and I made a sculpture, but the only thing that we have in common is actually photography. There's Tiziana Lamilia, who's here, and my friend Sojo in the United States. But it's, yeah, art historically, I mean, I have pictures of Man Ray just because it was like impossible to ignore. But like any kind of surrealist, like, but any of that kind of thinking is definitely something I still go to. I've been reading Anne Carson again because it's so nice. Here's just more images of how these are all just past works, and you can see more and more fingerprints as I go. This is like I'm sort of working on a project coming up that is slightly based on an Anne Carson poem called On Sleepstones, but it's about this sculptor Camille Claudel, and it it talks about. Do you know the poem?
No, but
Okay.
Camille's work makes me weep.
This is it.
Yeah, and this is the partner of Rodin, who was, you know, as is conventional, eclipsed by his practice, but it's tremendously tender.
Yeah. So there's like something about there's in the poem. Anne Carson describes this photograph of her, Camille, I guess in her old age, with her hands on her lap, and that they looked ginormous. And then I saw this sculpture that she made that also had this sort of ginormous hand. And yeah, since we've been talking about scales and scale and hands, I wanted to include this image. But yeah, I'm going to be I'm starting to dive into like that, the relationship with that photograph, like the description of the photograph. And her work, and her as a sculptor, but the photograph of a sculptor. This is Moira Davey, who I also have a lot of affection for, and I've chosen to include works of hers with hands. Maybe sometimes hers, sometimes not. And this is Lucy Stahl, who I think these are her hands, and she also uses scanner beds too. There's a lot of references to fingerprints, so. I look at her work and go, yeah, I get it. This is another work of mine. There's a few of them these are these cardboard cutouts, or not cardboard, just cutouts of photographs, and then these glass objects. They're almost like the mini tables, like really tiny, sort of gestural references to those. And this, like the pointing hand, is a really. Because of that thing I think about the photograph is always a pointing hand, I like to include. This is an image of the cover of a book by Artie Lang.
Yes.
Called The Divided Self. These are pictures of Shavasana.
Just slide right by that one.
There's another one right here on a lake. No, because I often think about Bed Island and like it having, in this, because these were made using the Bed Island sculpture, like capture image, it has these it's a joyful image, like I could see that, but it also I feel like has some kind of undertone of maybe something sinister. So I just think about how one position, like an actual physical position of lying down, could be very both blissful and also the opposite.
Right.
Yeah, because that's a dead body. That's a dead body.
So different. Yeah.
And that's me on a Saturday. No, it's just, yeah, this is also like, you know, I love this picture because it's really actually what those sculptures are kind of like, this idea that you want to be sort of static in transport. And I think pictures often do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, another quote that was floating through my mind as I was doing this writing about this project is Wallace Stevens. This is one of my favorite sort of clips of poetry. Description is revelation. It is not the thing described. Mm-hmm. And I think of your practice that way. It's not necessarily an object. It's the feeling of pressing your hands on your eyelids and then springing them off, and that sort of swimming color and memory that floats to the top of the lid. Yeah. You know. Yeah, there's something about it that there's no there, you know what I mean? But the actual essence of looking, or of memorial looking.
Yeah, there's sort of like the active aspect of looking, how it's, I mean, despite this being sort of a sedentary like kind of experience, that it is about like being curious when you're looking.
Right.
And being skeptical too, being suspicious too, like not necessarily trusting your eyes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of my questions.
Yeah.
Is this a good moment to pivot to the audience?
These are some more works from Oakville Galleries. Mm. So these are photographs of doors, and then there's stickers actually on the glass. So this is another kind of maybe like a closer reference to the tables, but they're upright and they exist. But so, and they have references to the scanner images, but this door is a physical door, and I think I like these images because of its, again, like a very static reference to movement, like passing through a door or passing through thresholds.
Right.
Yep.
Thanks very much for your talk. I had an interesting conversation with my father the other day, and he was trying to convince me that photography is death. It's dead.
Yeah.
And it was especially to do in reference to time, and the idea that its true life is one thing. Photography has to be an artifact. How do you in your work with the idea of time, like bringing the viewer? I mean, obviously you have the subjectivity, the recalibration of looking upwards and sort of the sense orientation there, but to sort of activate a rebirth of the image in the viewer as a live experience.
As a live experience?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess that happens. I guess maybe that was a problem that I tried to solve with the bed islands. You know, like that there's something about it that was, you know, obviously frozen. It's still, but I wanted there to, I feel like they have this kind of like activity still, especially as you move through them. So like there's light, right? In order for it to like really work, there has to be a light source over top of it. And if there's multiple light sources, there's actual multiple points of view that you can see it from. So it actually moves as you go underneath it. So when you're looking up, you're actually seeing slight shifts. So it's almost like a GIF. Like if you're like going back and forth, you can see like the actual shadow like kind of jitter around, and it has this kind of vibrational quality to it. So that was maybe my response to that kind of problem about time, and how time is so embedded and you can't escape it in terms, like in photographs, like it's obviously like, yeah, this was a moment. But if you make an image that is sort of more out of reality, like this one maybe is not so much, but say in the capture image where it doesn't, there's references to reality, but it also has, just going back through the whole thing, there's references to reality, but there's like, you know, this hand, but there's also like, it's obviously this veil, and like, it could be talking about some kind of illustrative, you know, you're some other kind of thing. It's not, you know, you don't have to make a photograph with a camera. Yeah. This one was, but I don't necessarily know if that's the first thing you think of when you look at it.
Right.
And there's other things where the first thing you think of is camera.
Right.
Or you think of like, yeah, lens or like person moving.
Yeah.
Captured moment in time. Like, I think that because you have that person, that moving finger, it has that, but just slightly, you know, like I just want it to be just slightly.
I think we forget too that the origin of photography in the mid-19th century was artistic and a bit deceptive. Like some of the earliest originators of the medium were creating collages from, you know, this is the ocean, but it's not the sky that actually went with that ocean. I've paired another one, just a better one. Yeah. And then somehow we shifted into an appreciation of photography as descriptive and documentarian and factual, such that it, you know, was founded in courtrooms more than anything else.
Yeah.
And we've had to kind of return to its playfulness and its possibility for deception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what I was going to say. I was going to say something. Yep. I agree. Yeah, no, it is. It's always deceptive, I think. It's never been like documentary, but I mean, I don't necessarily invest too much time thinking about that.
Sure.
You know, as an artist, like making photographs, like I always just think of photographs are, like I use found photographs all the time. I use, you know, photographs are just things. They're just like materials. They're sculptural materials. That's how I think about them.
Right.
So.
No one else? That's good. Before I say thank you, I just should have mentioned this year's Capture limited edition is of Nadia's work. It's a detail of it, and it's available for $300. You get a great piece of art, and it's also a fundraising tool for the Festival for Future Art. Thank you so much, Nadia and Sky. That was really great. Appreciate it.